A gun with a .01 float used to guarantee you a factory new skin. That was until October 23rd, when the knife trade-up update occurred, and with it, they changed all of the fundamental math underlying the trade-up contracts in Counter-Strike. Now, if you're not careful, it can give you a battle-scarred piece of garbage. And they didn't tell anyone, they didn't leave it in the patch notes, people just had to find it out for themselves. So this is the complete, comprehensive guide to trade-ups in Counter-Strike 2. If you trade up to knives, to pinks, to purples, whatever, you need to watch this. Now, before the trade-up update, it was actually less intuitive, but it was more simple, the math. You would take your 10 inputs, you would take the float values of all of them, find the average, and that was it. That average we'll call the float factor. Then the game would give you your output gun. It would take that float factor and apply it to that gun, which would result in the wear rating of your output gun. So let's say you input 10 skins and the average float of all of them was 0.1. If your output gun had a float cap of 0 to 1, you would get a 0.1 wear rating, or minimal wear. If your output gun had a range of 0 to 0.5, if you multiply that by 0.1, you get 0.05, which means it's now factory new. Same inputs, different output. So the float caps on your inputs didn't matter at all. They only mattered on the output, because you're taking the float factor and multiplying the float range. But now, that changed. Your float caps on your inputs matter just as much. Well, your 10 inputs also have float caps. Some of them could be 0 to 1, some of them could be 0 to 0.5, 0 to 0.8, whatever. So in order to make it fair, we're going to normalize it by putting the range from 0 to 1. So let's take 3 guns. We have the MAC-10 Fade, the R8 Fade, and the AWP Krakow. Now the MAC-10 Fade has a float cap of 0 to 0.08. So the range, if we just subtract those two numbers, is 0.08. Now if we want to normalize that to 1, we have to scale this range up by 12.5. So if our float value is 0.01 and we scale up by 12.5, our new float value is now 0.125. Let's do the same thing for the R8 Fade. The R8 Fade has a range of 0 to 0.5. To normalize that one, we only need to multiply by 2. So if we had a 0.01 float value for the R8, we are now looking at a 0.02 float value, effectively. The AWP Krakow, its range is already 0 to 1, so we don't need to normalize it at all. A 0.01 float value remains a 0.01 float value when used in a trade-up. So we started with all 3 guns having the same exact float value, but when you use them in a trade-up, their float values are calculated much differently now. So if you use 10 AWP Krakows, your average float is 0.01, but if you use 10 MAC-10 Fades, even though they're 0.01, they're counting as 0.125. So now they have a completely different contribution into your trade-up, which means that a lot of the previously favored inputs have changed. One of which being... Today's video has been sponsored by the lovely ladies and gentlemen over at skinsmonkey.com. Skinsmonkey is the industry standard trading forum and marketplace for anything and all things Counter-Strike. 24/7 support and an instant trading system so fast, those Bulgarian overpay goblins are sure to go out of business. Now, if that's not enough incentive, throw my code Mike in on the website for $5 off on your first trade. But if you trade up to $100 on the website, they'll double your bonus from 5 to 10. Now, if you don't have any skins, and I just gave you some free game on investment advice, you could deposit money and use the website as a marketplace as well. In that case, my code Mike will net you a 5% deposit bonus, bringing it from 30 to 35%. So go get swagged out, courtesy of skinsmonkey.com. It says GO8 Acid Fade. Now the Acid Fade was a very, very popular filler because its float cap was from 0 to 0.03, meaning that for pretty much any trade up you did, the output was going to be factory new, right? All you did was take the average of all 10 before, and your average was always going to be under 0.03 basically, so you were basically guaranteeing yourself a factory new output. But now we have to normalize that range, which is times 33. So a 0.02 float on the Scout is now effectively a 0.66, meaning that your outputs are going to be battle scarred. So the best trade-up filler became the worst one overnight. So the meta has changed. The old system, you wanted tight float caps starting at 0. 0 to 0.08, 0 to 0.03, 0 to 0.010, whatever. Now you want wide float caps, and where it starts and where it ends doesn't matter. If you can't find a 0 to 1, then 0 to 0.8 will do. But also 0.2 to 1 is the same thing. All you're looking at is the range. Where it lies doesn't matter anymore, because it doesn't matter where the range is, it just matters where it is in the range once we normalize it. And the market started to figure this out. We saw prices of certain things go up, right? Now you can see the ones with 0 to 1 float caps are usually the most expensive in a rarity class in a collection. And you could see these moves coming if you understood the update. But the emerald pinstripe is 0 to 1, and it didn't really go up too much. Why? And that's because how the game determines your output also changed quite a bit. Now let's say you're trading up 10 purples into a pink. Now every purple you put in, imagine it takes those purple's possible outputs and puts all of them into a pool of items. Then when you do the trade up, the game just randomly chooses one skin from that pool. Obviously it's weighted by how many times the skin appears. So if you use 10 AK Emerald Pinstripes, there's 10 P250 Franklins in that pool. 100% you get a P250 Franklin. If you do 9 Emerald Pinstripes and 1 M4 Icarus Fell, you have 9 P250s in that pool and 1 M4 Poseidon in that pool, which gives you a 90% chance and a 10% chance, respectively. That's why the Emerald Pinstripe was so popular, because it only had one pink output. Let's say we just took away those Emerald Pinstripes and we used the AK Slate instead. Our 10% chance of getting a Poseidon now drops to around 3%, because the AK Slate trades up to 3 different pinks. So now there's 28 guns in that pool. Before, there were only 10. And they made it a little bit more even. After the update, they actually made it a little bit more fair. And it more relies upon conditional probability as opposed to just picking from a random pool. So use that same example, you're trading up 9 AK Slates and 1 M4 Icarus Fell. Now with the old system, you'd have a 3% chance of the Poseidon and around a 32% chance of each other pink in the Snakebite collection. Now, instead of looking at the pools, it just looks at the guns that you're inputting and the collection that they're in. So there's 9 Snakebites, 1 Gods and Monsters. So if you get that 10% Gods and Monsters, you get a 100% chance to get the Poseidon. Done. There's a 90% chance to get the Snakebite, and if that hits, then it chooses your pink output. It just doesn't go into the pool and grabs a random pink out. So it kind of made all inputs equal in that sense as well. You can't game the system as hard as you could, but actually, the new update makes more sense. It's more intuitive. Why is this skin inherently better? Because its float range is 0 to 0.5, and this one is worse because it's 0.5 to 1. They both need to be equalized and normalized so that they can be compared fairly. The system actually makes more sense. Now, should they have thrown the update out when they did the knife trade-up update? No, they knew what they were doing. They didn't want a fucking billion factory new knives coming in at the same time. Definitely should have told people. But I guess they don't have to. So, I mean, at this point, a lot of the guns I choose in the armory and the, weekly news, I pick based on float cap. So I don't really have any specific picks for you. But when you're looking at collections, just make sure you're looking at the float cap. If there's 3 pinks in a collection and one is way more expensive than the other 2, it's most likely because of float cap. So I'd rather buy one of the expensive one with the large float cap as opposed to these 2 over here that are cheaper but have much lower float caps. They're not as useful for trade-ups unless they're not going to be demanded as heavily and not command a higher price. To avoid anything with a low fucking float cap. The Mac 10 Fade saw a pretty big pump a couple weeks ago, and the float cap is 0 to 0.08. It's simply not a good filler skin anymore. Therefore, I sold mine immediately because there's not going to be sustained growth there. That is clearly a pump attempt by someone. That's the new trade-up system. Thank you for watching. I should have a members only video out tonight or tomorrow morning. Other than that, later.